You check a home listing, see the price, and quietly close the tab because the numbers feel disconnected from reality. Then you open a retirement calculator, and the long-term number makes the future feel both distant and expensive. A few minutes later, buying your favorite meal or a small treat somehow feels easier than thinking about decades of uncertainty. On the surface, these choices seem unrelated, but they may be responding to the same emotional signal. We often label impulse spending as a discipline problem, even when the cause may be something deeper than self-control. Sometimes we are not buying an item at all. We are buying a brief sense of comfort when the future feels uncertain. Welcome to The Margin, where we explore money, financial psychology, and the emotional reality behind modern economic decisions. Today we explore doom spending, the habit of spending money when the future feels too uncertain to trust. In recent years, the term doom spending has quietly entered more conversations about money, stress, and everyday life. It describes spending money as a response to uncertainty when the future feels harder to trust than the present moment. Unlike ordinary impulse buying, doom spending is often tied to deeper emotions about risk, control, and stability. Many people recognize these purchases are not ideal, yet they still reach for them when stress starts building. They understand the value of saving and long-term compounding, but those goals can feel emotionally distant. When the time horizon feels too far away, immediate comfort begins to carry more emotional weight. Short-term satisfaction starts to look surprisingly rational when tomorrow feels increasingly difficult to predict. The human brain naturally prefers certainty, and today often feels more reliable than a decade from now. This is where financial decisions often shift away from pure logic and toward emotional reactions. And because emotions move faster than planning, they often shape spending decisions before reflection has a chance to catch up. One surprising thing about doom spending is that it affects people across almost every income and education level. Many financially knowledgeable people find themselves making the same emotional spending decisions. They understand compounding, long-term investing, and why patience often matters more than timing. But information alone does not always win when emotions become louder than logic. The deeper issue is often psychological exhaustion rather than a lack of financial information. Repeated headlines about inflation, layoffs, and economic volatility gradually shape how people see the future. A future that once felt stable can begin to feel uncertain and harder to trust. As confidence in the future declines, spending choices often start to change as well. This is usually not because people stop caring about the long term or their financial goals. Sometimes people spend more today because they are no longer sure the future will look the way they once imagined. Imagine a man in his late 20s who has spent years hoping to buy his first home. Every year he saves money, yet home prices seem to move faster than his progress. At first he stays optimistic because the goal still feels achievable within his time horizon. Then one day he quietly wonders whether that house may never become affordable at all. Once that thought appears, his relationship with money begins to change in subtle ways. The willingness to sacrifice today for a distant reward gradually becomes weaker. It becomes harder to reject small pleasures when the long-term reward feels increasingly uncertain. Many young adults experience this conflict without ever putting a name on it. They are not giving up because they are lazy, but because the finish line keeps moving farther away. And that frustration is one of the psychological roots behind doom spending behavior. When people talk about money problems, the spotlight often falls on the smallest expenses first. Expensive coffee, streaming subscriptions, and restaurant meals are usually the first suspects. Those purchases matter, but they are often not the deepest reason financial stress persists. Most people do not buy a costly coffee simply because they need a drink. They are often buying a small moment of comfort inside a demanding day. Sometimes the purchase is really a temporary break from pressure that keeps accumulating. The experience feels valuable because it can be enjoyed immediately rather than years from now. Big financial goals often struggle to compete because their rewards feel far beyond the current time horizon. The real issue is often not the coffee itself, but a weakening emotional connection to the future. Without that connection, every sacrifice feels larger and every long-term decision feels harder to sustain. Before judging the spending itself, it helps to ask what people are actually trying to buy in that moment. Often the product is only the surface layer of a deeper emotional need. What people may really want is a feeling that cannot be placed on a store shelf. Sometimes a purchase is really an attempt to make life feel enjoyable again after a difficult week. Other times, the purchase creates a brief sense of control in a world that feels increasingly uncertain. Sometimes the goal is simply to prove that today was not entirely bad. That is why emotional purchases often seem perfectly logical at the exact moment they happen. The psychological need being satisfied is real even when the solution is temporary. The challenge begins when short-term relief starts replacing long-term solutions and healthy time horizons. Eventually, a temporary escape can become a repeating pattern that quietly shapes financial behavior over time. At the margin, we call this pattern the hope gap, the distance between today's reality and what people believe their future can become. When people expect tomorrow to be better, long-term decisions feel less like sacrifice and more like progress. Saving money becomes easier when people trust that future opportunities will still be waiting for them. Investing feels worthwhile because the benefits of compounding seem connected to a future that still matters. But when confidence in the future weakens, people's financial behavior often begins to shift. The reward from saving feels farther away, while immediate spending starts to feel more rational. As the time horizon shrinks, instant gratification often wins against long-term goals. Higher spending can create more financial stress, increasing the sense of risk and instability. That rising stress can make the future look even less predictable, widening the hope gap further. The cycle often continues until people find a reason to believe that their long-term future is worth investing in again. Escaping the spending cycle usually starts with understanding that the problem is bigger than a single purchase. Instead of constant self-blame, recognize that financial decisions are often shaped by stress, uncertainty, and risk perception. The emotional reason may be valid, but that does not mean it should quietly control every financial choice. Long-term progress becomes easier when emotions are acknowledged without letting them drive the entire journey. Small goals often feel more achievable because the time horizon is short enough to feel real. A realistic milestone can motivate action more effectively than a giant goal that feels permanently out of reach. One useful habit is building a stronger connection with the future version of yourself. That future self does not need to be 10 years away because even 1 year can make compounding feel meaningful. When the future feels tangible, saving money starts to feel less like sacrifice and more like purpose. As hope returns, the urge to buy temporary relief often becomes less powerful than long-term progress. Doom spending is rarely just about money because it often reflects how people emotionally respond to uncertainty about what comes next. The real challenge is not the purchase itself, but the relationship we build with our long-term future. When the future feels distant or unreachable, today's comfort naturally becomes more attractive than long-term planning. In that moment, even a small purchase can feel like a temporary source of relief from everyday pressure. Yet lasting peace rarely comes from what we buy because consumption cannot permanently solve emotional uncertainty. Real stability often begins when people believe their effort still has meaning across a longer time horizon. At the margin, we explore not only money but also the systems and emotions that quietly influence financial behavior. Have you ever bought something you did not really need simply because thinking about the future felt emotionally exhausting?